Imagine signing your country's currency with just your nickname. Not because you're arrogant, but because you literally hate money and dream of abolishing it completely. Now imagine being appointed to run your nation's entire banking system, despite having zero training in economics or finance. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of how Che Guevara, yes, that Che Guevara, became Cuba's banking czar for 456 days and changed the island's economic destiny for the next half-century. And it all started with a hilarious misunderstanding. November 1959, Havana, Cuba. The revolution has succeeded. Fulgencio Batista has fled. Fidel Castro and his rebel commanders now face an unexpected challenge, actually running a country. There's a massive problem. Property-owning Cubans are fleeing the island. Capital is evaporating. The banking system is in chaos. And Cuba's economy, heavily dependent on American interests, is teetering on the edge. Castro calls an emergency meeting of his ministers. He needs someone to take charge of the economy, someone he can trust, someone with financial expertise. He looks around the room and asks, who here is a good economist? In the back, Che Guevara, the legendary guerrilla commander who helped win the revolution, raises his hand. Castro is surprised. He didn't know Che had economic training. But then Che realizes his mistake. He leans over to a colleague and whispers, I thought he asked, who is a good communist? Too late. Within days, Ernesto Che Guevara, medical doctor, guerrilla fighter, revolutionary theorist, and someone who had never taken a single economics class, became the president of the National Bank of Cuba. The position made him, effectively, the economic czar of the entire nation, one of the most powerful economic positions in the country, given to someone who openly despised money. The irony was not lost on anyone. November 26, 1959. Che Guevara walks into the National Bank of Cuba headquarters for his first day as president. Picture this. A 31-year-old Argentine doctor turned guerrilla fighter, still wearing his military fatigues and beret, now running one of Latin America's most important financial institutions. He had no financial background, no banking experience, no formal economic training whatsoever. And the bank itself was in shambles. 65 to 75% of managers, technicians, and engineers had fled Cuba after the revolution. The best and brightest had taken their expertise to Miami. What Che did have was complete trust from Fidel Castro, ideological conviction, and a burning desire to free Cuba from American economic imperialism. Cuba's economy in 1959 was essentially an American playground. 6 branches of National City Bank of New York, now Citigroup, National Bank of Boston, now Bank of America, and Chase Manhattan, now J.P. Morgan Chase, controlled massive portions of Cuban finance. American companies owned the oil refineries, the sugar mills, the utilities, the electricity. Virtually every major economic sector had American fingerprints all over it. Che saw this as colonial exploitation. And he was about to do something about it. But first, he needed to sign some currency. Traditional bank presidents sign currency with their full official names. It's a formal, serious affair. Che Guevara signed Cuban pesos with just Che. That's it, just his nickname. It wasn't a joke, it wasn't laziness, it was a statement. Money to Che was a capitalist tool, a necessary evil at best. He dreamed of a future where money itself would be abolished, where people would work not for personal profit, but for the collective good of society. This was the man now in charge of Cuba's entire monetary system. Fidel Castro would later admit, why I ever did that, I don't know, because obviously Che Guevara knew nothing about finance and banking. I put him in there because I guess I trusted him. Trust. In revolutionary times, trust matters more than credentials, but trust doesn't balance budgets. And Che was about to learn that the hard way. Che Guevara didn't waste time. Within months, he implemented the most aggressive economic restructuring in Cuban history. First, the American banks had to go. Remember those 6 branches of American banks? Che saw them as tentacles of U.S. imperialism, sucking wealth out of Cuba and controlling the island's economic sovereignty. He had no experience in international finance, no understanding of capital markets, no appreciation for the complex web of global trade relationships. What he did have was the militia. Che, the guerrilla commander, did what he knew best. He used force. American banks were expelled forcefully, permanently. Citigroup's predecessors, gone. Bank of America's predecessors, gone. J.P. Morgan Chase's predecessors, gone. The United States government viewed this as a provocation, because it was. But Che was just getting started. In May 1960, tensions escalated. The U.S. government refused to allow American oil companies to refine Soviet petroleum in Cuba. Che's response? He threatened to nationalize the refineries and not pay Cuba's oil debts. The Americans called his bluff. Big mistake. In July 1960, Che followed through. The refineries were nationalized. The United States immediately canceled its agreements to buy Cuban sugar, Cuba's primary export and economic lifeline. It was economic warfare, and Cuba was outgunned. But the Soviet Union stepped in. Moscow agreed to buy Cuba's surplus sugar. What seemed like salvation was actually a trap. Cuba was simply exchanging one form of economic dependency for another. By October 1960, the U.S. declared a full embargo on all goods entering and leaving Cuba. Che's response? Even more nationalizations, more sugar mills, more banks, more factories. By the end of October, Che's National Institute of Agrarian Reform controlled 615 businesses, 160 sugar mills. Every mine on the island, one man. Zero economic training. Controlling virtually the entire Cuban economy. A secret internal report, hidden from Che, warned that Cuba's economic reserves would dry up in 4 months. The revolution had won the war, but it was losing the peace. Faced with economic chaos, Che Guevara did something unexpected. He actually tried to create a system. The Soviet Union used something called economic accounting. Individual enterprises operated with financial autonomy, competed with each other, and used profit as a metric for success. Che hated it. To him, this wasn't socialism, it was capitalism with a red flag. So he invented, or rather reinvented, something called the Budgetary Finance System, or BFS. Here's how it worked. Instead of individual factories competing for profit, everything was centralized. The Ministry of Industries, which Che also ran, controlled 1,800 work units with over 150,000 employees. Every enterprise operated on a direct budget from the central government, no financial autonomy, no market competition, no profit motive. Money became merely an accounting tool, not a real economic mechanism. Che believed that in a truly socialist system, there should be no exchange of ownership when goods moved between state institutions. It was all one big collective enterprise, the entire nation as a single corporation. He studied how American monopolies operated in pre-revolution Cuba, companies like the Cuban Electricity Company, Shell, and Texaco, and actually admired their centralized accounting systems. The anti-capitalist revolutionary was copying capitalist organizational structures. When he visited the Soviet Union in 1960, he was shocked. Soviet factories were using abacuses for accounting. Meanwhile, the American companies in Cuba had been using the latest IBM machines. The backward Soviet economy wasn't the model Che wanted to follow, but his alternative, hyper-centralization from Havana, created its own disasters. Trying to run 1,800 work units from office towers in the capital was, as one economist later put it, a central planning folly of immense proportions. Decisions that needed to be made in minutes took weeks. Bureaucracy exploded. Inefficiency became the norm. And yet, Che pushed forward with his vision. Economics wasn't just about systems and numbers for Che Guevara. It was about transforming human nature itself. Che believed that capitalism had corrupted humanity, made us selfish, greedy, individualistic. Socialism, he argued, needed to create a new man, a new type of human being who would work not for personal profit or material incentives, but for the collective good of society. Instead of paying workers more for better performance, Che wanted moral incentives, certificates of merit, public recognition, the satisfaction of contributing to the revolution. The problem? Workers needed to eat. This is why there's not increased production, Che wrote, because the workers are waiting for material incentives which will not come, which cannot come. He acknowledged the problem, but doubled down on the philosophy. The Soviet system, he argued, tried to incorporate worker ownership, while what was really needed was worker responsibility. Che was trying to solve an economic problem with philosophy. He was trying to run a bank with revolutionary ideology. Meanwhile, capital continued fleeing the country. Cuba couldn't industrialize without capital. The economy was hemorrhaging money. The discount on foreign loans, primarily from the Soviet Union, temporarily offset the losses. But Cuba was becoming increasingly dependent on Moscow. The grand experiment was failing, not because the ideas were entirely wrong, but because ideas alone can't feed people. Che worked tirelessly. He was idealistic, dedicated, and absolutely convinced of his vision. But by 1961, even Fidel Castro was starting to worry. Che Guevara served as president of the National Bank of Cuba for exactly 456 days. In 1961, he moved to become Minister of Industries, where he continued implementing his economic vision on an even larger scale. But the damage was done. The Cuban peso lost its convertibility, meaning Cubans couldn't exchange their money for foreign currency without government permission. This lasted for over 50 years. The average monthly salary in 2008 was 415 pesos, worth about $20 at the official exchange rate. The centralized system Che created locked Cuba into decades of economic inefficiency, bureaucratic nightmares, and dependency on foreign aid. In 1965, Che left Cuba to spread revolution to Africa and South America. He would die in Bolivia in 1967, executed by Bolivian forces with CIA assistance. He became a martyr, an icon, a symbol of revolutionary idealism worn on t-shirts worldwide. But his economic legacy in Cuba, far more complicated. When President Obama and Raul Castro shook hands in 2015, beginning the process of normalizing relations, one of the major goals was to undo what Che had done, to reintegrate Cuba into the global financial system. Economists today debate Che's economic impact. Some see a visionary who tried to create an alternative to exploitative capitalism. Others see an idealistic revolutionary who destroyed a functioning economy with zero understanding of how markets actually work. The truth, as always, is complex. Che Guevara freed Cuba from American banking control, but trapped it in Soviet dependency. He tried to create a new economic model, but his hyper-centralization created decades of inefficiency. He wanted to transform human nature, but couldn't overcome basic economic realities. 456 days. One revolutionary with zero economic training. A complete restructuring of an island nation's economy. The effects lasted over half a century. Che Guevara's face is iconic, but his economic experiment is a cautionary tale. It's a story about the limits of idealism, about the difference between winning a revolution and running a country, about what happens when passion meets reality. When Castro asked, "Who is a good economist?" and Che raised his hand by mistake, no one could have predicted the consequences. That misunderstanding changed Cuba's destiny. And it all started with a simple confusion between two words. Economist or communist? If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most fascinating economic experiments, hit that subscribe button for more stories where ideology meets reality. What do you think? Was Che Guevara a visionary or a disaster? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to learn more about the Cuban Revolution and Cold War economics, check out these videos.